Okay, so I have crossed out there February 25th. Nope, never mind. March 4th. Nope, never mind. Not that one. There's no snow today, thankfully. The only like weather issues I think are like high pollen counts. So I think we're in good shape here. And so this talk is about fossils, but more specifically about fossils from Arkansas, and more specifically about the Holly Creek fauna, which is a unit, a geologic unit that preserves an extensive vertebrate fauna from the early part of the Cretaceous. All right, and ready, technical difficulties. Come on. It's gonna advance really fast here in a second, I bet. Nope, okay. Nope, everything's frozen. 1 second. Why do you not want to go? Okay, 1 second, guys. I'm fine. Let me just pull this guy back up. 1 second. Okay. There we go. That's working. Okay, let me share again. 1 second. I'm just going to share my entire screen, I think. Share screen. Share. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, there we go. All right. Before I begin, I'm thanking a lot of my collaborators, especially Jeff Pittman, who is at the Ouachita Museum, or Ouachita Mountains Biological Station. He's kind of the first one to bring these fossils to my attention. He actually had all these fossils with him as a professor at the University of Lamar University down in Texas. Rebecca Hunt Foster from the National Park Service, who was the author of the Arcansaurus friedei paper, along with Dr. James Quinn, who posthumously was added to that paper. Helped me out with lots of conversations about Arkansas paleontology. She's an Arkansas alum, and so she's a great resource. And then Rich Cifelli, Randy Neidham, and several of his students, especially Joe Fredrickson, helped me out with the microvertebrates, which I'll explain what microvertebrates are, but they're tiny little guys, little vertebrates, and all those guys are experts in microvertebrates. And then a couple of grad students of mine, Kirsty Morgan, or one grad student, Kirsty Morgan, and undergraduate Mason Frucci also helped me out. And then I'll briefly talk about this cool site here, the that site here, which is actually, let me turn up the, there we go. I'm not sure, which is the dinosaur track site from the same location that the Holly Creek fauna, the material I'll be talking about today, is from. And then Brian Platt was the lead author on that paper. So I'm just gonna leave that down for a second. I'm gonna playing tag with this thing here. Arkansas Mesozoic continental vertebrate faunal record is not that well known, especially the faunal record of the body fossil faunal record. By body fossil, I mean like bones, teeth, etc. That record is fairly poorly known from Arkansas. The exception of that is like that Ornithomimid foot, which eventually became known as Arcansaurus friedei. Some random hadrosaur limb bones that have been found in the Upper Cretaceous, so the later part of the Cretaceous. These are some of the few vertebrate remains from the Cretaceous that have been found, continental, meaning organisms that walked around on land. So there's mosasaur bones from Arkansas that have been found. Those are so I'm talking about things that like walked around on land or lived in lakes and ponds and streams and stuff like that. Not a whole lot of fossils from Arkansas exist until recently, but we have an abundant ichnofossil record, and ichnofossils are just trace fossils, tracks and traces. And starting with Jeff Pittman's description of these extensive sauropod trackways here. You can see this is a picture from his dissertation. Actually, no, nope, I'm not going to be able to do it. So this is extensive sauropod trackways from his dissertation. That is one of the first major Cretaceous vertebrate fossils found in Arkansas. And described and published on. Also more recently, the large theropod track-bearing surface that was found from the same site as this guy. And that is a really extensive site that we published on back in 2018, but it was originally discovered in 2011. And this is an Acrocanthosaur track. Well, the track fossil itself is called Eubrontes, found from that site. Okay. Oh man, is this thing gonna freak out again? Oh dear. 1 second, guys. Let me just kill some of this stuff. Sorry, 1 second. No. If we have to, we can switch computers. I'm gonna close that. I don't know why that's open. Okay. There we go. Okay. Screen share. And let's do the whole screen and share. There we go. Okay. Back to where we're at. Okay, so the Lower Cretaceous of Arkansas, which is the unit of rock that we find our fossils from here. The Lower Cretaceous correlative with the Trinity Group of Texas. So the way rocks are named, this is not going to go. Huh. Doesn't want to go. Sorry, guys, online. What's that? What's that? Yeah, you can click it on the slide. It seems to. Oh, there we go. Let's see if this works for now. So the unit of rocks that these fossils are from are called the Holly Creek formation, which is down here. The Trinity Group is a set of rocks that are Lower Cretaceous in age, meaning that they range between about 120 and 100 million years. And those rocks that we see here in Arkansas are similar to the rocks that we see in Oklahoma, and there the rocks are called the Antlers Formation. And then in Texas, those rocks are called the Trinity Group, which are composed of the Twin Mountains, Glen Rose Formation, and Paluxy Formation. And if you know, like, dinosaur tracks, the Paluxy Formation is one of those famous formations. Paluxy and the Glen Rose Formation are really famous for sauropod dinosaur tracks. Let's see if this works. Hey, it's working. All right, so this time period, many people call the Mid-Cretaceous. And why do we find the Mid-Cretaceous fairly important? Part of that is because we're interested in linking two of the most diverse time periods during the history of dinosaurs together. So when you think about dinosaurs, you often think about the extensive Morrison Formation fauna. So stegosaurs and, like, I forget if we're on Apatosaurus or Brontosaurus. That keeps going back and forth. Or you can think of the extensive and diverse fauna from the later part of the Cretaceous. So all of the different ceratopsians and tyrannosaurs and the various types of tyrannosaurs that you get. And those two time periods are really well known because we have lots of rocks and really good preservation of those rocks. The time period in between that, which includes the age of the material that we're looking at here, is less well known. Part of that is because the rocks are poorly dated, and part of it is because there's not a whole lot of rocks from that time period preserved in North America. So we're interested in kind of linking this area. So anywhere we have rocks of that age that have fauna that we can look at is important. Also, during this time period, there's an important event called the Cretaceous Terrestrial Revolution. The Cretaceous Terrestrial Revolution, according to paleontologists, is this advent of more modern faunal types, like the evolution of plants happens during this time. The evolution of bees and pollinating organisms, even the evolution of, like, ants and stuff like that happened during the Cretaceous Terrestrial Revolution. And that happens in this mysterious time period here. And so trying to understand this time period and how, what factors affect the transition to these more modern ecosystems is important. And some of that can be because of the changing paleogeography and biogeography during this time period. So these graphs here are different reconstructions of the geography of the western part, Midwest to western part of North America, starting from the Aptian around 120 million years ago to the Mid-Turonian around 92 2 million years ago. And you can see one of the major things that's happened is the flooding of the continental interior by the Western Interior Seaway. This was an ancient seaway that basically linked the Boreal Sea to the north to the ancient Gulf of Mexico. And so during this time period, climate is rapidly changing. The Cretaceous is known as a greenhouse climate. And so with this overall higher temperatures on the Earth, we had no or very few polar ice caps, so sea level was higher. And then the other thing that happens is we have several major instances of global warming associated with volcanism. That type of volcanism is in the form of large igneous provinces or lips. You can see the examples here on the far right of that column, lips. These are various very voluminous volcanic eruptions. Some of them were within the ocean, some of them were on land. And those volcanic eruptions released a lot of carbon into the atmosphere and caused things like ocean anoxia, obviously sea level rise due to melting of ice caps and things like that. So the other thing that's happening during this time period is on the far western part of North America, we are starting to establish the North American Cordilleran, so the mountain chains that go from north to south. That is in the form of what's called a severe orogeny, which is basically a mountain building event. So we had these big Andean style mountains forming in western part of Utah and eastern Nevada. All of these things can act as barriers for organisms to move across to different ecosystems. And that in turn can cause evolutionary change. So an example of this is in this study by Mike Diemick, who looked at a variety of different apex predators. In the early part of the Cretaceous, the time period that we'll be looking at, we have things like Acrocanthosaurus primarily being the only major apex predator. But in the Campanian, after the continent has been fragmented and during basically global warming time periods, we have a number of different apex predators, probably representing lots of individual ecological niches. Then as the sea level retreated in the Maastrichtian, we're back to very few apex predators like Tyrannosaurus rex. So again, we're interested in understanding this transition. So to look into that, we're trying to find a bunch of different fossil localities throughout North America to contribute to this global or at least continent-wide data set. And that's the importance of the material here in Arkansas, because this is a fairly unknown area of North America as far as what animals were here. So I'll start off with Arkansauros friedei briefly, which is the state fossil or state dinosaur, I think. And this is a little ornithomimid. Well, not that little. It was big enough, right? And it is known from a right foot with some toe bones and a few claws. It is a unique species based off of the anatomy of the toe bones, specifically this little toe bone here. This is looking at the top surface of these bones. So if you were to take these bones and turn them on end, this would be the shape that you saw. And so this shape is unique to a number of the different ornithomimids that Rebecca compared these to. Its closest relative is actually this foot here, Neomckellys, which is from the Cedar Mountain Formation of Utah. This is one of the oldest known ornithomimids from North America, and its age, here it is right here, and relationships to some of the other ornithomimids suggest that it's most closely related to organisms from Asia. And so based off of that, Rebecca interpreted that possibly these ornithomimids came across from Europe into North America and spread all the way to Utah, because the Beringian land bridge hadn't been established yet. So it probably couldn't travel from Asia through the Beringian land bridge. So a hypothesis that we can test into the future. All right, so the material that I'm going to be talking about is the Holly Creek Formation. It's possible that Arkansauros friedei came from the Holly Creek. Unfortunately, it was found in a field, so there's not a whole lot of context as to where it was found. But the bedrock there was Trinity Group, so probably it was from either the Holly Creek or the Decline. The Holly Creek Formation is the unit of rocks below the Decline limestone, which is where those dinosaur tracks have been found. Unfortunately, the Holly Creek Formation is not really well exposed because it's mostly like mudstones and siltstones, really soft rock that is easily weathered. So only really get exposure of it in like road cuts or ditches and things like that. But overall, it's a muddy, gray mudstone and sandstone. It has lots of plant fossils with it. It's very organic rich, and as a result, you have lots of pyrite formation in it. It's below the amazing track site here at the gypsum mine, and this material is from this mine location. And here are some examples from that track site and some examples of the tracks themselves. This is from our LiDAR scan, and the highlight of this were these really nice, really large theropod trackways through here, as well as the sauropod trackways. You can see the two sauropods tracking each other along there. That's those two arrows. So the depositional environment of the Holly Creek Formation, however, was likely a little channel stream deposit, probably close to the coast, not like on the coast, but close to the coast. And has gone relatively undescribed until recently. So Jeff Hittman was presented with this material from some of the mine operators at the site. He worked on sieving some of the material to extract some of the microvertebrates, but he never really got around to publishing it because his dissertation was on the track sites. So, and then he's been carrying around these remains with him ever since he graduated in 1989. So the material comes from this little deposit here, which with this very terrible reconstruction. And the preservation of the material is not bad. It's pretty good, except where pyrite exists. Pyrite is not good for bones. A lot of times we call it pyrite disease because pyrite can oxidize and break up and expand. And a lot of times bones just basically like explode from the inside when there's pyrite associated with them. The reason why there's so much pyrite there is there's so much organic material here. When you have lots of organic material, lots of microbes like to munch on them, so much so that you get sulfur reducing bacteria, and then they release sulfur into the water, and then the sulfur reacts with iron, you get pyrite. But anyways, the nice thing about the organic nature of this is, one, we have lots of cool charcoal, which we can probably do some cool stuff with in the future, but you also have some really cool like plant fossils like this little pollen cone, Clestrobus arkansensis. Oh, that's some pyrite. All right, so the fauna. This is the microvertebrate fauna. This is fauna that's basically been, you basically take the sediment and you sieve it, wet sieve it in sieves, and then all of the little bones and little microvertebrates that are in there basically get preserved from there or can be extracted. And so these are things like usually less than about 2 millimeters in diameter. All right, so this is some of the material we have. We have sharks, such as this hybidont shark, like Lonchidion, can't ever say his name. We also have other types of sharks. I'm going to admit Travis. Hi, Travis. I'm going to, Travis is a friend of mine. We also have some of these chondrichthyon sharks, these laminiform sharks. This is the stuff from the Holly Creek, and this is a reconstruction, I believe, from, I think that's from the Cloverleaf Formation. We also have little fish teeth. These are little crushing fish teeth. And this is an example of one from the Cloverleaf Formation of Wyoming. This is Lepidotes. And most likely this is a Lepidotes from the Holly Creek as well. And we have these nice little fish jaws with these little spiky teeth, as well as some gar scales. These are typical scales that you get from gars. So yeah. And then we have a new species of fish that we described in this paper. So this new species is a pycnodont. Pycnodonts looked kind of like this. These were like kind of long, fat looking fish. Kind of reminds me like of a perch, but I don't know if a perch is actually a pycnodont. This new species of pycnodont fish is called Anomoeodus caddoi. We named it after the Caddo Nation, from the original inhabitants of the area, and we did get permission from the Caddo Nation to use caddoi in the naming of this specimen. So these are various parts of basically little teeth. So this is an isolated tooth is A. This is a tooth plate. So basically in the top of the mouth, it had these little tooth plates. And the configuration of these tooth plates is unique to this particular species. This is how fish people name it. This is Joe Frederickson stuff, so I trust him. He's the fish guy for us. We also have some little frogs. So this material, this is a frog left maxilla, so the upper jaw. And this is looking at it on the inside, and this is a frog tibia fibula. so a leg bone. And then this is a little lizard, little bitty, tiny 1 millimeter wide lizard vertebrae. And then we also have our other new species that we named in this paper, which is a little skink for a skinkomorpha called Sciroseps pawhuskai. Sciroseps is Greek for gypsum lizard, means gypsum lizard because this is from a gypsum mine, so we named it gypsum lizard. Pawhuskai is one of the leaders of the Osage, and the name I think means like white hair or something like that. And so like the gypsum is white hair. Figured it would work well, and also honors another one of the local native peoples from the Arkansas, Oklahoma area. Also, we received permission from the Osage Nation to use pawhuskai. And so it's a new species of skink. And we have a little left dentary. The scale bar is behind the zoom thing. So let me move this guy back up here. Here's our little scale bar. So there's 1 millimeter. So it's about yay size, not very big. And it has several nice little teeth within it, some little empty tooth sockets, but really good preservation overall. Uh-oh, is it doing it again? Nope. There we go. We also have some little turtle shell bits. I'll get back to the turtle shell bits in a bit. Some crocodile teeth. These are what are called Bernasartidae teeth. Unfortunately, teeth actually don't tell us that much about the species of crocodile. So this is just kind of like more of a shape of it. And then we have some dinosaur teeth. These are some of the dinosaur teeth that we have. Cool. This tooth, Ricardoestesia, is a common tooth that you find in the early part of the Cretaceous. You can also see an example of this from the Arundel clay in Maryland. And then we also have several specimens of Deinonychus teeth. And the really cool thing about these Deinonychus teeth is that we have everything from probably a subadult to little hatchling, like tiny little baby size. Because if you look at the scale bar for this one versus this one, you can see the big difference. And I rescaled it, if it'll do it. There it is. I rescaled it there. So that would be the size difference of the little guy. So that was probably a little baby, like fresh out of the egg kind of baby. And then we also have mammal material. Not a whole lot. And unfortunately, the actual specimens of these have been lost. Funny story about that. Unfortunately, Jeff went back to the museum to look for it. So a lot of this material, some of this material was reposited at the Texas Memorial Museum where Jeff was doing his PhD. He did his PhD at the University of Texas. So he thought it was there. And he found something unexpected, which I'll explain in a bit. This is a reconstruction based off of photos that my colleague Rich Cifelli drew. I don't know a lot about mammals, but basically they're little mammals. So when we compare just the microvertebrate fauna across to different formations, the Holly Creek fauna is most closely related to the antlers formation, which is no surprise because it's essentially the antlers formation. It's just called the Holly Creek formation here. So it's probably the same thing, essentially. The other formations that's really close to is the Cloverly and the Cedar Mountain formations, which is unusual because those two formations are hundreds of kilometers away. The Cedar Mountain Formation is in Utah and the Cloverly Formation is in Wyoming. So that's kind of interesting. Now we can compare the macrovertebrate material. A lot of crocodile. We have lots of crocodile from this site, especially crocodile osteoderms or little bony scutes. These guys that look like they have these little spines coming off of them are from the back. So those are dorsal scutes. And then these guys that are like hexagonal in shape or rectangular in shape are from the underside, from the belly. These are ventral scutes. We also have lots of vertebrae. These vertebrae are, this is a dorsal vertebrae. These two are cervical vertebrae or neck vertebrae. And we have also, this is also cervical vertebrae. We also have some of the neural processes that pop off. Basically, they attach where this little wrinkly bit is on the bone. This is the rugose texture to it. And the fact that these are not fused onto these bones suggests that this crocodile is probably a juvenile, or certainly not an adult. So it's still growing because they're not fused. Usually an adult, they're fused on there. So this is probably a juvenile. And I do have, let's see if we can do this. I don't know if we dare try, but we'll try it. I have 2 videos of a couple of these bones put back together. I'm still sharing, so you guys should be able to see it. Okay, so this is, first one here is a video of what those neural spines look like when attached to the vertebrae. So this is the centrum, and basically the neural cord would go or the spinal cord would go through here. This is deformed, so this bit here has kind of been pushed down. This has been reconstructed to what it probably would have looked like. It's kind of, the other one was kind of crushed, so this is what it would have looked like. And yeah, that is the vertebrae. Okay, let's go back and see if PowerPoint is behaving. All right. Okay, here we go. All right, and then the other thing that we find here that was found is all of these smaller skull bones and teeth, and we have a bunch of teeth in the back that you can look at. But one of the other things that was found when Jeff went to go look for those little mammal teeth was this skull. So he went to go find some mammal teeth and he found a skull. This is actually TMM 41881, which I'll describe the interesting story of that skull here in a second. But from here, we have various parts of the skull. This bone here is this bone here. This is just a much smaller one than this. This bone here is this bone here. It's called the quadratojugal. Also, it's smaller, but not the right size for this. So between these two wouldn't be from the same animal because this is too small to belong to the same animal that this came from. So this is 2 different organisms. And then obviously this is a third crocodile. So we have at least 3 individuals of this type of crocodile here. This crocodile has very similar characteristics to this crocodile from the Twin Mountains Formation. So we describe all of the cranial material, the skull material, as Paluxysuchus numini. All right, so this interesting story of TMM 41881, and this is like so classic paleontology for something like this to happen. So this skull, and I heard about this skull. I've heard about this skull since I moved to Arkansas, but I've never seen it. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that really exists. So the skull was originally presented by the mine operators to the Arkansas Geological Commission, which is currently the Arkansas Geological Survey. Eventually, they showed it to Dr. James Quinn, who is a paleontologist at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Quinn presented on this skull, as well as the Arkansas Friday foot. It wasn't called Arkansas, it was just called Theropod, Arkansas, at a National Geological Society of America meeting in 1973. Sadly, Dr. Quinn passed away in the field like 2 years later, and so he never really did anything with either of those specimens. Eventually, the skull was taken by the Arkansas Geological Commission and probably, I think, a relative of Dr. Quinn named Kenneth to the Texas Memorial Museum. So that's how it ended up at the Texas Memorial Museum, and gave it to Dr. Wang Langston, who was the paleontologist at the Texas Memorial Museum. Dr. Langston has this really, and I won't read the entire letter because we're kind of running behind, but in the letter from Dr. Langston, he writes to Dr. Williams, who is part of the Arkansas Geological Commission, about the skull, saying, hey, we received this skull. It's a really cool skull. I would love to work on this some more. It'll probably take time because paleontology takes a really long time, but I'll work on it and eventually it'll get published. That was the last we heard about this skull because Dr. Langston moved on to a number of other things that he was working on, and nobody ever really found out about this skull until after Dr. Langston passed away a few years ago. So Dr. Langston passed away a few years ago, and then they cleaned out his office, and in his office they found a big cabinet full of crocodile skulls that various people had brought to him throughout the years, this being one of them. And so luckily, Jeff found this skull and was like, hey, that skull, I found it. It's here. We should probably put it in the paper, after we had already submitted our paper. So that took a little bit of explaining to the editors why we were adding this amazing skull. This skull is actually also under study by some colleagues at the University of Iowa. And so we give a very cursory explanation of this skull because somebody else is already working on getting higher, like a full detailed description of it. But yeah, that's how paleontology works. So it was basically missing for 40 years until now. Some of the other material we have are Neomckellys, which is a big turtle. This turtle is probably about that big. We also have some bits of it back there. And so we have some of the carapace. So this is the back here. So these are bits of carapace. And we also have bits of the Palastron, which is the bottom bit here. And these are the bits of the Palastron. And this is an example of the type specimen of Neomckellys, for example. So we have this bone here, which is this bone here, and this bone here, which is probably somewhere in here. And then we have our theropod, which is Acrocanthosaurus atucensis, or at least that's what we're giving the name, that we're fairly certain it's Acrocanthosaurus atucensis. It's the only very large theropod dinosaur in the southern part of the US. And the type specimen of this was found in the Antlers Formation, which is in Oklahoma. So probably basically the same formation. Our specimen, though, is smaller. It's about 70% the size of the type specimen, which is a full adult. And that 30% is a lot. It's actually a lot bigger. The type specimen. We also know that it's not a full adult because we see this is a sacral vertebrae, which is one of the vertebrae between the hips. Typically, these vertebrae in adults are fused together, and they are not fused. We have this kind of rugose texture here. So this is probably from a subadult or juvenile. These are bits of the hip. I'm not going to go into detail on the hip. And then we also have some finger bones. We have phalanx 1, digit 2, which is this bone here. We also have this here, so it's about yay size. So it's a lot. It's like, again, about 50% the size of the holotype. So it's probably from a subadult or juvenile. Then we also have some sauropod material. We have at least one sauropod tooth, which is what we call a titanosauriform tooth. And then bits of the humerus. This is the proximal end, so closer into the body, and then this is the distal end. And one vertebrae here, one caudal vertebrae. And then we also have some ankylosaur material. So ankylosaur, those armored dinosaurs. This is one of the oldest and few ankylosaur material from like the Gulf Coast area. There's one from the, there's pawhuskai up in Kansas or Texas, and then there's one in Mississippi, but those two are younger, I believe. So we have one dorsal plate, which probably would have been on kind of like on the side here. One of these dermal spines probably went further up here, or maybe a tail spike, and then a variety of different osteoderm. All right, so when we look at actually a lot of material that we have from this site, this is our fauna list. So we have some chondrichthyes, which are sharks. Osteichthyes, which includes our new specimen, our new genus, our new species of fish, Anomoeodus caddoi. We have some frog, some little lizards like the skinkomorph, our newly described genus and species, Sciroseps pawhuskai. Turtles, so mostly semi-aquatic organisms. Crocodiles, including Paluxysuchus numini. And then several dinosaurs, including sauropods, large theropods, small dromaeosaur theropods, and ankylosaurs, and then a couple of bits that somewhere in the world, who knows exactly where they are, little mammals. So this is our fauna list, mostly semi-aquatic, but some land organisms. And so this is kind of our reconstruction of what the area would have looked like. So we have a little hatchling Deinonychus here looking at Scaroseps pawhuskai. This is some artwork from a colleague of mine, Brian Eng, who does amazing artwork. And this little Scaroseps is hanging out on a charred remains of a cycad with a sauropod kind of tromping around the background, and everything is kind of burned here. This is his reconstruction of it, because we have lots of charcoal from the site. So it's possible that we have all of these organisms here in one place because of a fire, either maybe not necessarily like killing all these organisms, but certainly when you have fire, you destabilize the land surface, and so you get lots of weathering, and so any organisms in the area that were recently dead kind of get washed into an area. So and so we have our probably Sauroposeidon is probably the sauropod that we have here. That's the main sauropod that we have in like the Trinity Group in Texas and Oklahoma. All right, so what does this mean? So this Holly Creek vertebrate has some significant paleogeography and ecology implications. The fauna of the Trinity Group is really similar to fauna hundreds of kilometers away. So most of this fauna is similar to the antlers formation, and basically is essentially the antlers formation. But this is another data point to suggest that during this time period in the early part of the Cretaceous, we have relatively low diversity, not a whole lot of different organisms existing. The same organisms that existed in Wyoming existed near the Gulf Coast. This is in contrast to the highly diverse faunas during Laramidia, during when the Western Interior Seaway split North America into Laramidia and Appalachia, and but also similar to the low diversity time period we have in the latest part of the Cretaceous. And so we're still trying to figure out, okay, is this a climatically driven thing or a tectonically driven thing? This transition from a low diversity to higher diversity data points. And so just this data set here will be brought into the larger data set that we have colleagues working on and looking at these different diverse ecosystems. And then actually a lot of my work, I actually don't do much of this vertebrate paleontology stuff. This is like my first for real paleontology paper. I do a lot of work with stable isotopes and geochemistry on these vertebrates themselves to reconstruct the climate, reconstruct the CO2 concentration, temperatures, precipitation rate that we get during different time periods. So if we can track those changes and track the changes to the diversity of the organisms, we can try to help try to figure out what is causing what. Okay, so just to summarize, we have a richer early Cretaceous vertebrate history than previously thought, and this is the first large continental vertebrate assemblage from Arkansas, and provides some important data points to understand paleogeography and faunal distributions. And Arkansas's early Cretaceous fauna is similar to many other Cretaceous fauna, suggesting an east-west linkage between like the East Coast and the West Coast, and is suggestive that, and this fits really well with the timing of the rise of the Western Interior Seaway. And so this fauna itself will provide some paleoclimatic information as well, including stable isotopes. We've already done some stable isotope work on some of the turtle shell materials that one of my students have published on. Okay, I'd like to thank all of these people, especially the museum in Pearls, and a lot of my collaborators who helped me out along the way on my first for real paleontology paper. So I had lots of people helping me out, including Jim Kirkland and Chris Brochu and Thomas Adams and Tony Friolo and Ron Tylowski with the Perot Museum did some preparation work on some of the material that we just don't have the equipment here to do some of the preparation work. So they did some of that. And then amazing paleo art that Brian Eng does. So you can go to his website, don'tmesswithdinosaurs.com. All of this material is curated at the museum, so you can go and check it out. We have some of it here. And then I'll take any questions. And here's our URL as well for the museum. So, okay, thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Any questions? And I think, yeah, go ahead.
So you said you studied large apex North American carnivores, like I saw Acro and Tyrannosaurus.
Mm-hmm.
Did you happen to study Lithonax?
So Mike Diemick, who did that study, probably did look at Lithonax and all like Displetosaurus. What are some of the other ones that happened that are around at that time period? Lithonax is around Campanian in age, I believe, right? Is it from the Caparowitz Formation? I think, pretty sure Lithonax is from the Caparowitz Formation. And so that's during that time period where there are lots of diverse apex predators. So that's one of the ones that would exist during that time period. We thought like diversity was just really high. But I have not personally seen, I know people who have worked on Lithonax, but I have not personally worked on Lithonax. Yeah. Yeah.
You said that Archosaurus frya is a unique species.
Mhm.
When you said it, do you mean it's like a taxonomic dead end, or does it have living relatives today?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll clarify. So I forgot about. So the question was, I had said that Archosaurus is a unique species, and kind of like, what did I mean by that? I meant unique in the sense that it is an identifiable genus and species, not necessarily unique. I mean, it's its own unique organism itself. So it's not like something. It's not the same organism that we saw somewhere else. It's its own genus and species, is what I meant by that. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, how do you find the sites of excavation with modern technology has actually like helped you to find those sites like geospatial technology?
Okay, so the question was, how do we find these sites and what geospatial technologies we use? Okay, so this site was found when the mine operators basically dug a big ditch with a backhoe and used it to drain waters into their different holding ponds. And since they dug that big ditch, they started finding all these chunks of bone coming out. And then Jeff Pittman was doing his PhD dissertation at that time. So they're like, hey, we found these bones. And so that's kind of how that happened. And finding bones here in Arkansas is not the easiest thing because there's just so many plants here. So finding bones in Arkansas, this is part of the reason why the vertebrate record of Arkansas is so poor, is that usually they're eroded away in a creek bed or buried by plants and colluvium and soils and stuff like that. So you usually only find them where we have these big excavation type sites, like in this case, a mining operation for gypsum. Out west, we basically, or like where there's not plants, like the desert. This is why paleontologists love the deserts, because there's no plants, darn plants. Is we look for the same age, the correct age rock. So we're looking for rocks that is of the correct age, and we have geologic maps that show us where that rock outcrops. And then we're also looking for rock that preserves sediment that is, if we're looking at dinosaurs, that preserves sediment that is continental in origin. So sandstones and mudstones that are deposited on land, and we have clues from the rocks to tell us, oh, this was a channel sandstone, or this was a freshwater lake. Like we can look at the rocks themselves and be able to tell, like, oh, okay, this is this depositional environment, so we should also get these types of organisms. Likewise, if you're looking for like mosasaurs, you'd be looking for like limestones and deep water shales that represent marine depositional systems. So those are the two things: the correct rock type and the age of the rock. Yep.
Travis in the chat asks, any hope for future discoveries coming out of this formation in southern Arkansas or additional formations? He said it seems like the cat is about out of the bag.
Yeah, Travis. I hope so. I know Rebecca was hoping to go back down there and like talk to the mine operators and be like, hey, can we poke around? I know they don't really like people poking around down there at all. And if I could ever get more time to do stuff in Arkansas, I could go down there at some point. But yeah, I mean, just the other day, somebody sent me a picture of like this sandstone nodule with like a crocodile, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So stuff exists, but most of it's on private land. So we rely on people basically either donating them or at least allowing us to photograph them or CT scan them. So we have reconstructions where we can have some sort of, I mean, technology is great, getting so great. Like you can take a nodule and 3D scan it and then 3D print out all of the bones. And then, you know, so if it's from somebody's private land, they could keep the original specimen if they want to, and we have like a reconstruction of it. So yeah, I mean, Travis, do you want to go down there sometime? Okay, great. Yeah, Travis, give me a call. We could go down next. I don't know when I have enough time to go is the problem. Yes.
Unrelated to orcans and dinosaurs, but I know the correct pronunciation is Giganotosaurus, but do you pronounce it Giganotosaurus or Giganotosaurus?
I've always done it Giganotosaurus, but I mean, it could be Giganotosaurus. I mean, it's tomato, tomato, tomato.
Yeah, Giganotosaurus the official quote-unquote
Is it?
pronunciation, but it's so much easier to just say Giga.
I like it, Giga. It makes it sound bigger. Well,
Yes.
it was big, right?
It
So,
was.
yeah, it was really big.
What's
Any
your
other-
favorite dinosaur?
It's always been my favorite dinosaur has always been Triceratops because of the Triceratops song when I was like in second grade. So that's the main reason why. I could also say Gemini Raptor because that's named after my sister and I. So that's probably a good one too. But since I was a little kid, it was always Triceratops. But I'm very partial to the early Cretaceous dinosaurs at the moment. So any other questions? Are we good? Sweet. Thank you.
Anyone is interested in seeing the actual fossils as well as touching those reconstruction plans like are back there. Thank you all again for coming.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Yeah.
You mentioned that you had used LiDAR technology.
Yeah, that
Was that using like a aerial or